What's up guys, it's Kristen here today with my February wrap-up. Now the past few months my reading has been a little more hit and miss, and I'm the first to admit that I am an extremely picky reader. I do not give out 5 stars very easily or very often, so I am very surprised that this month I either really liked or incredibly loved every book that I read, and I actually gave out 3 5-star ratings. So the first book that I read was Burial Rites by Hannah Kent. This is a historical fiction novel as it is based on the true story of a woman in Iceland who was convicted of murder, and the novel follows her long, torturous wait until her execution date, but it is also flashbacks that show the events that led up to the murders, and I absolutely fell in love with this book. It is possibly one of the most beautifully written books I have ever read. Hannah Kent's writing is somehow both lyrical and poetic, but at the same time extremely gritty and realistic. And all of the characters are incredibly fleshed out and real. It is completely heartbreaking, but in that way that is so worth it. So in the end, of course, I give this 5 out of 5 stars. I have an entire separate review of it that I will link down below, but honestly, this was so good. I recommend it to everybody. So after reading the very dark and slightly depressing Burial Rites, I really just needed a fun and light read, so I picked up Carry On by Rowell. And as I'm sure most of you know by now, this is the fan fiction that Kath was writing in Rowell's other book, Fangirl, and it is set in this very Harry Potter-like fantasy world. And you know, I've been having a rough time with young adult novels recently and starting to lose faith, but of course Rowell can bring it all back. I loved reading this book. It was such a fun experience. I mean, first of all, having 2 main characters who are LGBTQ, not these sidekicks or the best friends or the author saying it after the fact, is something that we need so much more of in literature. But a lot of people say that you don't have to read the book Fangirl before reading Carry On, which technically yes, but I don't really agree, because Fangirl is all about the character Kath trying to prove that her fanfiction should not be looked down upon, that is what she loves, to play around in a world that already exists, and that is really her creative outlet, and she loves being able to mold the characters to her own taste. So if you pick this up expecting a typical fantasy book, that is not what you're gonna get. This is Kath's version of fantasy, where the characters are like regular teenagers who swear and make pop culture references, and it is extremely romance heavy. This is also a satire on fantasy, where Rowell is taking all of these tropes and flipping them on their head, which I thought was brilliant, so I give this a 5 out of 5 stars. And next, for a little more light reading, I picked up The Wide Window, the 3rd book in Lemony Snicket's A Series of Unfortunate Events. This one's probably been my favorite so far because I love the character of Aunt Josephine, who they have to go stay with, and she is just terrified of absolutely everything, and her greatest love in life is grammar, which just made me laugh the whole way through. Again, I love the writing in these books, and I'm really excited to keep continuing on with it. Then for my first foray into the graphic novel world, I picked up Persepolis by Marjane Satrapi. This is separated into 2 parts, the story of a childhood and the story of a return. Usually now though, if you get them, they're bound up together in one edition. This is actually a graphic memoir though, as it is the author's experiences living through the 1979 Iranian Revolution. And this was another amazing read for me. I thought I knew a lot about the revolution prior to this, but reading it through the eyes of a 10-year-old child, it is honestly like reading a dystopian novel. You cannot believe the horrors that took place to the people of Iran. But then she also infuses the story with a lot of humor. I honestly laughed out loud at several parts, and I think this is so important for everyone to read to truly understand the events that went on in history and how they affect us today. But she writes it in such a fun and accessible way. I did a full review of this. Again, I give it 5 out of 5 stars. I now need to read so many more graphic novels. Then for my non-fiction read of the month, I picked up The Lost City of Z, A Tale of Deadly Obsession in the Amazon by David Grann. This is the story of legendary explorer Percy Fawcett, who dedicated his entire life to finding this lost city in the Amazon jungle, but when he went on his final expedition in 1925, he was never heard from again. People could never figure out how he died or what became of him, so the journalist, David Gran, decided to investigate for himself to see if he could find any clues as to how he died or if this lost city ever really existed. I really enjoyed reading about this and learning all about the Amazon, especially the native tribes of the Amazon, who have always been looked down throughout history as primitive, as savages, what have you, and that they wouldn't have been able to form a complex civilization. But my only problem reading this is that I didn't get as much of an emotional pull towards Percy Fawcett. He is such a larger-than-life figure that it's hard to view him as a real person and not just a character in a story. And I also felt that David Gran went off on a few too many tangents in the book, and I found myself getting disinterested at certain points. But overall, again, I did really enjoy it. I would give it a 3.5, maybe closer to 4 out of 5 stars. And I did a full review of it, which again, I will link below. And lastly, for my classic read of the month, I read How Green Was My Valley by Richard Llewellyn, and I buddy read this with Kate from Kate Howe, and I will link her amazing channel down below. This is really a coming-of-age story about a boy named Hugh reflecting back on his life growing up in a small mining town in Wales and showing how beautiful his home was at a time before the Industrial Revolution really took over. I found Llewellyn's writing to be very beautiful. I especially love how he would go into these extremely long and intricate descriptions of sometimes very ordinary and everyday things, and in that way making them incredibly beautiful and making you see them in a way that you never thought of before. But unfortunately, the pacing in this book is very slow, and though I did fall in love with Hugh as a boy, he was incredibly sweet and endearing, and there was this scene when a woman was being shamed in the church for being an adulterer, and he stands up in front of them all and shames them all and calls them hypocrites. I just absolutely fell in love. But then as he aged, he kind of lost that, and I really started to dislike him as he got older. And so I really didn't like the second half of the book nearly as much as the first, but again, overall, I did enjoy it. It's interesting learning about that time period in Wales, so I give it 3.5 out of 5 stars. So that is it for all of the books that I read in the month of February. Again, I am very happy with all of these books. I really did enjoy them. And I would love to hear from anybody who has already read these books, or if you're really interested in reading them, please leave your thoughts in the comments down below. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you again soon. Bye!